folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this is Franchise Frenzy, the Part 4's. And this series was created by TheHorrorMan and Horrific Nightmares JM. So let's get into it, shall we? In that dead last, number 25 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, otherwise known as Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So this film doesn't really have any continuity with the last film. It's just, once again, a whole new family, for Leatherface to mess around with. And it's basically a rehash of the original. It's kind of like a really bad remake of the original. Highly, highly inferior. But it does feature Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger, before they became stars. I will say Matthew McConaughey is kind of fun to watch because he's so crazy and over the top, He's certainly the bright spot of the film. Otherwise, it's pretty terrible. I don't care for the iteration of Leatherface in this film either. It's kind of wacky. In at number 24 is Return to Sleepaway Camp. Definitely another really, really bad one, and kind of embarrassing for the series. It's got this super, super annoying kid in it that you just want to punch the screen every time you see him, and he's like pretty much the star of the movie, unfortunately. But yeah, we do actually get to see kids in the summer camp this time, though. And we do see the return of Felissa Rose as Angela in the series, Unfortunately, she doesn't show up till the end. She is revealed to be the killer all along. But yeah, it is at least nice to see her come back to the series. Next we have Jaws 4: The Revenge. This time it's personal. Yeah, the shark actually has a vendetta this time around. And you actually hear the shark like growl and moan and stuff. It's really weird. But the shark has a vendetta against the Brody family, I guess. But we don't get Chief Brody returning to this film. We do get his wife, though. I guess Roy Scheider didn't want to be in this one, and he's probably right, because it's pretty bad. But it's kind of fun to watch in a way. It's so bad. Next up, we have Omen 4: The Awakening, which probably shouldn't have been made. It's kind of a made-for-TV sequel. And when I say sequel, I kind of use that term loosely. Because there's nothing much that ties this to the original series, other than the fact that they kind of shoehorn it in at the end. Because otherwise this is kind of basically a remake, instead having a young girl instead of a young boy, who's this evil child, but it's your basic, bad seed kind of movie, but yeah, they do kind of shoehorn it in at the end that she's the daughter of Damien Thorne. But it's definitely unworthy of being part of the franchise, I think. But as far as made-for-TV horror films go, I have seen worse. It's watchable, but yeah, as part of the Omen franchise, it does not belong. Next up, we have Hellraiser Bloodline, which is the last film that I saw in theaters for Hellraiser, and it just so happens that was the last film to be released in theaters, as everything else after this was straight to video. And you can see why, because, I was highly disappointed with this film. It's definitely kind of a rough watch for me. This is the one where Pinhead goes to space. I do like some of the designs of the Cenobites in this film. Some of the practical effects are pretty cool. But yeah, all the weird space stuff, it's just weird, you know? It doesn't belong in the series for me, but yeah, I didn't care much for this one. Next up is Land of the Dead, which is the 4th entry in George Romero's Dead series. And yeah, I think by this time George Romero's career had kind of fallen off a little bit, but you know, I was hoping he would make a nice comeback with this movie, you know. But sadly, that's not the case. I didn't care for this one. This one actually had probably the biggest budget of the Dead series, so it was kind of George Romero having a grand scale to play around with, but doesn't really work for this film, in my opinion. I kind of prefer the lower budget, kind of smaller scale films, because this one has like some bad like CGI in there and stuff with the effects, and yeah, I just didn't care for this one. It has Dennis Hopper in there, and I was kind of hoping we get kind of a wild and crazy performance like he was in, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 or something, but he was pretty mild-mannered in this one, so... it's got a good cast. You got Asia Argento in there, John Leguizamo. I kind of like the Dead Reckoning. Looks kind of this tank that they make to kind of run over the zombies. It's kind of cool, but yeah, it just feels really slow and boring. You know, I just didn't care for it. Next we have Puppet Master 4, When Bad Puppets Turn Good. It's kind of cool. Yeah, this is another really fun one, featuring another new puppet called Decapitron. You know, it kind of swaps heads, and he's the leader of the Talon puppets. Yeah, definitely a fun one, a lot of cool stuff. Next up we have Resident Evil Afterlife, which was released originally in 3D. And does have some pretty cool 3D effects because, you know, by this time, you know, they had kind of perfected the 3D effects. So yeah, much better than like the old school days when you had like Jaws 3D and Amityville 3D and all that. The effects were much better these days, and Resident Evil Afterlife was kind of an early, one of the early ones of like films coming out in 3D. But yeah, in this one, like some of the zombies, like their heads split open and stuff. It's kind of wild, but yeah, another solid entry in the franchise. A lot of fun, some great zombie action, you know. And of course, you got Alice kicking ass once again. Solid. Next up, we have Saw 4, which I have as part of this kind of box set here. Yeah, this is kind of where the franchise gets a little convoluted. It's pretty solid. I mean, it's got some awesome gore effects, especially at the beginning when they showed Jigsaw being, you know, open up, cut up, and and they're doing an autopsy on him, and they pull his insides out, open his chest up. It's really nasty. But of course, inside they find a tape, a secret tape that, you know, shows that, you know, Jigsaw had a whole big plan before he died to continuing the murders, you know. And that just becomes the basis for the whole rest of the series, you know. It becomes about what Jigsaw set up before he died, you know. Next up we have Leprechaun 4 in space. Yes, another one in space, but I find Leprechaun 4 to be absolutely hilarious. It's definitely the funniest one in the franchise for me. Every time I watch it, I just crack up. I can't help it. Technically, it's a bad movie, I guess, but it's just so much fun. I can't help it. And here's where I introduce the spin-offs of the Conjuring universe. I know some people started it before now and did it in order of the actual release dates, but to me it kind of made more sense to have the Conjuring films themselves in order, because it's going to be quite a while before we get a fourth film. I figure now is where I'll start putting in the spin-offs. So the first one was Annabelle. And a lot of people didn't like this film, but yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's a nice addition to the franchise. I always find this puppet to be so damn creepy, you know, and they do such a good job of it. And the real life Annabelle is just basically like a Raggedy Ann doll. It's not that scary looking, but you know, they certainly play it up in the film for sure. She looks super creepy, and yeah, it's got some good atmospheres, got some great jump scares, you know. It's fun. Next up we have Alien Resurrection. I find this film to be a lot more fun. It probably is the most fun entry in the Alien series. And this one features Sigourney Weaver returning as a clone, you know. But hey, we get Sigourney Weaver back as some form of Ripley, so it's worth it. And some awesome gore effects. I think Alien Resurrection is certainly the goriest of the entire franchise. It's got a lot of really cool practical effects. There is some silliness and some goofiness, but I definitely prefer it to the third film, that's for sure. You got Ron Perlman in there. I love his character. You got Winona Ryder in there. She's kind of annoying, though. Next up, we have Scream 4, which is the final film to be directed by Wes Craven, unfortunately, because he did pass away shortly after this film was made. So, rest in peace, Wes Craven, but I do feel like Scream 4 was a return to form for the series. Yeah, I quite enjoy this one. I think it's a solid return. And I like the killer reveal in this film, and I like some of the new characters that they introduce in this film, as well as, you know, the classic crew with Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox and David Arquette. Yeah, definitely a solid entry in the series. Next up is The Evil Dead. Yes, the remake from 2013. Definitely a solid film as far as remakes go. It definitely adds something new to the franchise, instead of just doing a complete rehash of the original film. Ash isn't even in this one, technically, until, you know, I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, I like the story they tell here, and it's brutal. It's got some awesome gore effects. So it's brutal, and that's what's so great about this one. And it's pretty scary too. But yeah, it's definitely faithful to the original as well. It plays a lot of homage to the original film and the original series. So yeah, it's a solid remake. Next up, we have Bride of Chucky. Yes, the fourth film in the Child's Play series. So, from here on in, they're just called Chucky. They're no longer called Child's Play. And this film introduces the character of Tiffany, which is really cool, and she's become synonymous with the franchise. I mean, she's still in the TV series as well, played by Jennifer Tilly. And we get to see her, you know, before she turns into the doll and after she turns into the doll, Tiffany. Really cool. So much fun. John Ritter is actually in this one. It's got a really cool, like, heavy metal soundtrack, you know, really cool. Yeah, a lot of fun, and that's what Child's Play is for me. It's just fun slasher, you know? It's nothing more, nothing less. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4. A lot of people feel like this is where the series kind of goes downhill, but I don't think so. I enjoy this one. I think there's a lot of cool dream sequences, a lot of cool practical effects, and yeah. Although Robert Englund does start getting a little more jokey, he didn't go too far for me. To me, Part 5 is where they go too far in that comical direction there. But yeah, I enjoy the Dream Master. A lot of people don't like the fact that some of the Dream Warriors from Part 3 are killed off early on. And the fact that they replace Kirsty in the film with a different actress, Tuesday Night. But I will say I love the fact that Tuesday Night sings that one song that I love, you know? Running from this nightmare. Once again, a really cool score, too. Next up, we have Night of the Seagulls, which is the fourth and final entry of the Tombs of the Blind Dead series, and definitely a solid return to form for the series, where the last one, the Ghost Galleon, was a little bit of a departure with a different setting on the ghost ship. Here we're back to the Templar Knights doing their thing, sacrificing young virgins to achieve immortality. And there's just some awesome Knights Templar action. This one has, you know, more gore, more nudity, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. And of course, that great creepy atmosphere that the series is known for. Next up, we have The Ghost of Frankenstein. So this film sees Lon Chaney Jr. taking over the role of the Frankenstein's monster as a ghost, of course. So yeah, huge shoes to fill when you're taking over for Boris Karloff, who's the greatest to ever do it. But he does a solid job, and we do see Bela Lugosi returning as Igor as well, which is great. So yeah, it's got that classic gothic atmosphere of the Universal Studios films. Yeah, definitely a solid one. Next up we have Phantasm 4 Oblivion. I quite enjoy this one quite a bit. I think it's a solid entry in the series once again. There is one cool scene where it shows young Michael with the tall man, and I was like, "What? How did they do that? This looks just like the original." And apparently that was kind of a deleted scene from the original film, so that was cool. It's got some cool effects once again, a lot of action with the spheres, and we do get to see a different side of the tall man at one point. We see him as kind of a normal guy, just this kind of distinguished British gentleman, and it was kind of cool to see a different side of the tall man. I like that. Next up, we have Psycho 4, The Beginning, which actually was made for Showtime, I believe. Yeah. So yeah, for a made-for-cable film, this was really solid. It's a sequel/prequel, so it's both in one, really. Because it does feature Anthony Perkins as older Norman Bates. And he kind of calls into this radio station and kind of tells his whole life story, and that's where the prequel aspects come in. We see a young Norman Bates living with his mother, played by Olivia Hussey, who's really good in this film. So that's really cool, as well as you get a little bit of sequel stuff, too, with what's going on with Norman presently. So it's pretty well done. It's pretty solid. I enjoy it. Next up, we have Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which is a lot of people's favorite Friday the 13th movie, I notice. It's not my favorite particularly. There are a few that I think are much better, but that's just my opinion. But yeah, I do enjoy the film. I think it's definitely a solid return to form for the series after I was very disappointed with Part 3 in 3D. I thought it was kind of hokey. But this one brought back kind of that dark tone of the first two films, as well as some awesome kills. One of the best final acts of the franchise with Tommy Jarvis, played by Corey Feldman. Some of the characters in this film I find kind of annoying, but yeah, definitely a solid entry, and we get some awesome gore effects once again by Tom Savini. Next up, we have House of Dracula, which is the final film in the Universal Dracula series. Some people might consider it more of a Frankenstein movie, but hey, does have Dracula in the name, and Dracula is in the film, this time played by John Carradine. Really fun movie because it features the Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr., and Dracula, so it's really cool to see this kind of monster mashup, you know? Yeah. It's a lot of fun. Next up, we have Halloween 4. Definitely a solid film in the franchise. One of my favorite of the sequels of Halloween. It does feature Danielle Harris as Laurie Strode's daughter. Because Laurie Strode apparently had died off in this film in a car accident. But yeah, it's really just Jamie Lee Curtis didn't want to come back, so they had to come up with something else. And yeah, it was great to see the return of Michael Myers after they went a different route with Part 3, Season of the Witch, which wasn't about the whole Michael Myers saga, so it was great to see them go back to that. Because this does a great job of it. I will say what I do enjoy about Halloween 4 so much is the performances. I mean, Donald Pleasance is so great returning as Dr. Loomis. He's awesome. And, you know, the introduction of Jamie Lloyd, played by Danielle Harris, and Ellie Cornell as Rachel Carruthers is great. She's kind of like a Laurie Strode type of character, so that's what makes this film great to me, because otherwise I feel like it could have been a run-of-the-mill generic slasher, but they elevate the film quite a bit. Next up, we have Hammer horror in the mix with Frankenstein Created Woman, which I have as part of this 3-pack of Hammer films. Definitely, probably my favorite sequel in the Hammer Frankenstein canon. It's such a blast. I love the kind of... This is kind of like their Bride of Frankenstein in a way. I love Susan Denberg's character, how she's kind of this ugly duckling in a way, and, you know, Peter Cushing makes her beautiful, but at the price of she becomes a killer. So this film is almost like a slasher movie with the female killer, you know, hacking up people, you know. It's a lot of fun, and Peter Cushing is just awesome in the film. You know, it's a great entry in the series. I love it. In this film, instead of just doing brain transplants and making monsters, this film he learns how to actually transfer his soul. So how cool is that? So yeah, Frankenstein has come a long way in this one. And in that number 1 is Hammer once again with Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Absolutely love this one, starring Veronica Carlson, and of course Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. And it's amazing. The gothic tone in this film is some of the best ever in Hammer. It's just amazing. Some of the scenes on the mountainside, when the Monsignor is crawling up towards the gothic castle, the big gothic Dracula's castle, with the huge cross, and it's shining in the mist of the fog everywhere. And oh man, I love the gothic tone of this film. It's great. And it's great to see Christopher Lee as Dracula having some more to do and some more lines here than he did in the previous film, whereas he had no lines in Prince of Darkness. So it's great to see him back having some dialogue in this film. And this also features my favorite death of Dracula in the entire series. I love it. You know, he falls from the castle over the cliff, and he gets impaled on the huge cross that the Monsignor left there. It's awesome. You see him bleeding from the eyes, and it's really, really good stuff. I love this one. I love the characters in this film too. Veronica Carlson, the guy who plays Paul as well. Great acting in this film. It's just a blast. It's one of my favorite in the Hammer Dracula series. So Dracula Has Risen from the Grave in at number 1. And thank you guys for joining me for Franchise Frenzy, the Part 4's. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Good evening, folks, and we got some brand new merchandise for you over at www.TheHorrorCona.com, and that's CONA.com. Representing the Horror Corner. Great new design. We got the Morbid Hour live stream there, you got the Horror Hangout live stream there, and you got my nemesis, the Dark Fate. So grab your t-shirt over at www.TheHorrorCona.com. And we also got this beautiful new mug. Look at that. Very, very cool. Thought that came out really nice. So grab your merchandise today over at www.TheHorrorCona.com. Folks, don't forget to grab your Sean Patrick Erschen gear and represent the Horror Corner. Also, check out these awesome mugs we have. Perfect for your coffee. And definitely check out the Horror Hangout live stream t-shirt and represent the legacy of the Horror Hangout. Check out the link in the description below this video.